Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bruce County Museum and Cultural Center. My name is Matt Johnson. I'll be your host this afternoon as we have a look back at the 80th anniversary of the Dieppe Raid from August 19th, 1942. The Dieppe Raid brings up many questions for many Canadians, regardless of the level of knowledge you have of the Dieppe Raid, and I've been fortunate enough to sit down with Canadian author Mark Zuehlke and ask him a few questions about the raid. I hope you enjoy watching the interview as much as I enjoyed doing the interview. I started out by asking Mark just what exactly does fascinate Canadians about the Dieppe Raid.
I think one of the things, so when the official histories were done by the Canadian Army about World War II, mostly written by Colonel C.P. Stacey, um, there was a tendency to downplay the roles where we did very well, even like Juno Beach and that. It was you always had a kind of feeling that they were sort of, well, Canadians did okay, but they could have done better. That kind of mentality was there. And I think that kind of tainted how Canadian historians came to look at the role that the Canadian Army played in World War II. So we don't celebrate, there was a culture then of not celebrating our successes. And that kind of leads you to look at, well, the failures. Now, why did we fail? And that's what kind of constantly drives it is, and, in fact, again, Stacey, and that was part of it, is, a tendency to look at the Dieppe Raid, not from its failure being inevitable through bad planning, but a feeling that maybe if it had been British Marines who had carried out the raid or something like that,
Right.
that the outcome could have been different. So there's a need to then, well, Canada failed. So now we have to try and understand why Canada failed. And out of that also comes, we have 3,367 casualties out of a force of 4,800 roughly. So it's not just a failure, it's a disaster. And really what then comes out of it is, why did the raid happen? And what were the events that happened in the planning and that led to the failure? So then it becomes like this bone, this skeleton that you pick through over and over and over again, trying to find the critical, compelling elements that bring it forward. So we've had, starting in the 1960s, you start seeing books come out that are the real reason for the raid. And, there's one every decade, the real reasons for the raid. And that's one way of approaching the story and the event. And so I think that's really what drives it is, there's always this desire to have a reason behind the raid, to justify the raid, to find an excuse for the factor that it was a failure. And, when I started doing the research, I was thinking, well, maybe there'll be something there.
Yeah.
And as you look along at the lines of things, you go through the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of pages of the amount of paper that was generated by the Dieppe Raid is awesome. It's for one day. It was thousands of pages of material, not just in the lead up to it, but then the analysis of what happened afterwards. Because truly, the Canadian Army and the British Army and the British Admiralty and everybody were trying to, in the aftermath, understand A, what went wrong, and also B, what can we actually learn from this?
Right.
And so there was a lot of soul searching, a lot of looking, and out of all that, there's different things that were part of why the raid was launched, or became elements that tagged on to the raid plan as it went along. But ultimately, the real reason for the raid was that Combined Operations Headquarters particularly Hughes Hallett, the naval commander who was in charge of planning these things. He and his team became interested in, could we put a division, and it wasn't Canadians at that time, but an infantry division ashore in France near a town and hold some ground, or possibly hold that town for 24 hours or 12 hours or whatever, and get them back off again. And so, as John Hughes Hallett said, ultimately it was raiding for raiding's sake. And that was what the whole point of it was. The original plan for Dieppe wasn't that bad. It was kind of well conceived, actually, because they weren't going to land in front of the town. They were going to land on the flanks near, not in Pourville, where they landed on Green Beach, but nearby. They were going to land on the other side of the Dieppe as well, not at Puys, where they also landed disastrously, but a little bit further east. And then they were going to come in behind the town in a pincer movement, and possibly not even take the town. They were more concerned about the Luftwaffe airfield that was inland from there, where there was supposed to be the divisional headquarters for the infantry as well. And if they could take the airfield and take the divisional headquarters, they could get some documents and stuff like that. They were also wanting to, there was the German radar station that's just on the to the east of Pourville, up on the headlands, and they wanted to capture that because, again, they wanted to understand. They didn't know much about the German technology of radar stations, and so they wanted to learn about that. So that was kind of the original plan. And then it got changed by Bernard Montgomery, actually. During a critical meeting, he basically says, well, there's no, basically no media value in what you're doing. It's not a showstopper kind of thing.
Sounds like Montgomery,
he puts it differently, but that's the essence of what he's saying. And so then the plan is, well, now we'll land the main force in front of Dieppe. And the most critical error in that is that we will also land the tanks on the beach in Dieppe. The original idea was that the tanks would land to the west in concert with the South Saskatchewan Regiment and the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, and they would carry out the attack towards the airport. And they would have the tanks with them. Now we have the South Saskatchewan Regiment and the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders landing at Pourville, which is separated from Dieppe by a very major headland, and very narrow roads out of Dieppe leading towards the airfield. The tanks are then supposed to break out of Dieppe on their own, unsupported, and make their way by road to meet up with the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders and carry on to the airport. That is just illogical.
Pretty tall order.
Because Churchill tanks, which is what these were, they're big, they're slow, they're ponderous, they got a lot of firepower in them, and they're heavy, so they're hard to knock out. But with the kind of weaponry that the Germans had at that time available, but for them to go by themselves all the way, several miles to meet up with the infantry, who are then unsupported as well, and trying to operate on their own, it just is a recipe for disaster.
It doesn't make much sense when you look back now at it. It's no, not at all.
No, and you just give your head a shake, when you look at that plan. It's got everything in it. It's got meticulously timed schedules for every boat that's involved in this raid. It's got meticulous times for every regiment of what they're going to achieve at this specific time, that specific time, where they're going to be. I don't think Operation Overlord was probably as detailed planning as Dieppe. In fact, they probably learned then not to do such detailed planning because, of course, it's not going to work out that way. So, and also it includes not just the Navy and the Army, but the Air Forces, because this was also, that day is also the largest air battle that is fought in the Western Front by the Allies and the Germans of the war. And that was a very deliberate part of the plan, is the British Air Commander Trafford Lee Mallory, I should say, wanted to draw the Luftwaffe into a very major fighter battle over the beaches of Dieppe, and with the idea that he would destroy the Luftwaffe. In actuality, it goes the other way around. We suffer, the RAF and the RCAF and the American Air Force suffer the biggest defeat of the war. And that's partly because the Germans don't have to, they can go back to their airfields, refuel, rearm, be up in the sky very quickly, where our guys are shuttling back and forth from the United Kingdom. How could you think this wouldn't happen? The Luftwaffe was known to be very strong in that part of France because, not that long before they'd fought the Battle of Britain. And so they were there, and they had, capable flyers and stuff, and then they fought very well, as did the German infantry on the beaches of Dieppe. The commander of the German infantry was a guy called Konrad Haas. His division took over in late 1941, I believe, that area. And he didn't expect a raid on Dieppe, but he was a person who was going to make darn sure he was ready for a raid if one came. And so he started fortifying that an 80-kilometer length of the beach, of the coastline. Every beach was heavily fortified, lots of wire, lots of mines and stuff. The beaches in Dieppe were heavily mined, lots of wire. Gun positions overlooking the beach at every angle. He had machine gun positions in all of the hotels along the front of it. And if you go to Dieppe, there's two headlands, one on each side, and they're very close to the town. And so he had gun batteries up on each of these headlands that are firing right down the length of the beach. And the port commandant was very dedicated to the idea of the defense of the port. And he was very well prepared with his own naval forces and his naval defense forces with guns again. A lot of German, French, they inherited, when they took Dieppe, about 15 75 millimeter French guns. And he used these very well around Dieppe as additional firepower. And he also, in the west bluff, there's a castle on the top, and then down that bluff there's a whole series of caves, natural ones and some unnatural ones that were dug over the centuries. He transformed one of these into a battle headquarters. And so when the raid starts, he moves his headquarters rapidly from a hotel in town up into the headquarters up there in the cliff. He's got a bird's eye view of the battlefield, and he directs the entire defense of Dieppe personally. Haas is inland trying to direct the overall battle of on the beaches in Dieppe, and also the beaches at Puys and Pourville and where the commandos land. So they've got, the command control is brilliant, extremely well done. And, the Germans win quite easily because they're prepared, they're ready for the idea. They can respond. They've been rehearsing this for a long time. They're absolutely dumbfounded that the tanks land on the beach at Dieppe because they had actually tried it. They had, the port commandant in Haas actually launched an exercise where they landed a number of German tanks onto the beach. And they didn't get off the beach. It's all rock there. It's
Okay.
the rocks are about this big on average, and the rocks get into the sprockets of the tank treads and break them. So they had to drag their tanks off the beach because they were immobilized. And they said, okay, no one in their right mind is going to try this. The worst beach of the bunch, and Puys is the hardest one to visit, because you stand on that beach and you think, what on earth were they even thinking? It's completely circled by a highland, by heights. So it's like a landing in the middle of a horseshoe. And they're very steep. The road into Puys is a real steep, narrow little road. And there's still 2 German bunkers there, like big concrete pillboxes, one on each side of the beach, that you can see. Like they just machine guns could fire down each side of the beach. And there were other positions as well that have been just, removed over the decades. The Royal Regiment of Canada lands there and they just have no chance. So the plans for those beaches, Pourville and Puys, was that the Canadians who landed there, the Royal Regiment of Canada on the one, supported by one company of Black Watch that were supposed to land afterwards, and the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, the South Saskatchewan regiments, that they would go in and do in the Royal Regiment of Canada's task was to get up on the heights, move along that headland, and take out the German gun battery that was able to fire down on the beaches of Dieppe. Okay. That was its job. The Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders were to go inland and get to that airfield that I mentioned earlier and meet up with the tanks that, of course, could never come. The South Saskatchewan Regiment was to go up on the headland between Dieppe and Pourville and take out the radar station, and seize whatever material, whatever they could take away from there to learn what were the Germans doing in that regard. So that was and then once they've completed all their tasks, they were to push on through to Dieppe and be evacuated out of there along with the raiders who were in Dieppe. So that was kind of the structure of the thing. So they were going to seize. The Dieppe itself was not considered very important. It was more just, to establish a presence in the town, take the town, secure it enough that the other forces could come through, get into the town, and then everyone would be evacuated off the beach with the Fusiliers Montreal covering that.
Okay.
And a British commando force at the same time would come into the port, and there were a few German fishing trawlers and primarily, even more importantly, the Germans, after they abandoned the idea of invading England, had left behind a whole bunch of barges and tugs, and the barges particularly were important because at this time we don't know how we're going to invade France, so it's like, some barges could be kind of handy.
Why not? Yeah.
So we'll tow those out to sea and take them away as booty. There were also a couple little German mini submarines there that they were interested in getting as well. And as the raid's planning got going and it got closer to launching, around April 1942, the plan is really crystallized. Brigadier Church Mann, who's the Canadian officer really responsible for the plan, he's not responsible for the planning because the planning has been done. It's so meticulously worked out, he can't change anything. But he's making sure that he can actually fulfill the plan. He starts noting that there's this whole bunch of what he called, in one report, he called them sort of like carpetbaggers who are attaching themselves to the raid. Okay. And this is a mixed bag of small commando units, everything like that, who have their own agendas. they're going to get in there and they're going to do this and that and the other thing. Largely a lot of it's after trying to get secret documents, code books, anything like that.
Right.
And this is where the Enigma story comes in, the latest
I was
theory.
going to ask about that. Yeah.
This is the latest theory as to why the raid on Dieppe. So that small team gets anchored into the raid in April 1942. The raid has been being planned meticulously since January 1942. So it's just another add-on. The current thesis being brought forward by another historian is that it was the engine at the front of the train. I always think of it as, well, it was more like the caboose at the back of the train, just tagged on.
Yeah.
And of course that was partly because the German Navy had added a fourth rotor to its Enigma machines, and they had originally had 3 rotors, and the code was all based on the code that the British and Polish had broken was based on a 3-rotor Enigma. Okay. And so the fourth rotor changed the codes. Now the British don't know what's going on at sea. They can't track the U-boats. And the Battle of Atlantic is going worse. It's not going to help a lot if you steal an Enigma machine and or the codes from a town called Dieppe. The port commander is going to kind of know he lost something, and that there's certain value in what he lost, and the Germans would just change the codes and possibly add another rotor to the Enigma machine. So it's not, it's not that important.
You're not going to sacrifice a whole division just to get
No, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't hold up. That whole Enigma thing, it speaks to that need that we seem to have as Canadians for a reason for Dieppe. And so it's had a lot of travel, it certainly convinced an enormous amount of the media who, didn't actually know anything about Dieppe probably before they got doing these interviews. But it doesn't hold up to really being looked at scrupulously.
Do you have any Dieppe excursions coming up, or?
Yes, actually. The company's called Liberation Tours, and spring 2023, we're doing one tour that's called the Cinderella Army Tour. And we will start at Juneau, and we're going to go up through Dieppe and through the Scheldt Estuary, the Rhineland, into Holland, all the way up to northern Holland. So basically following the Canadian path up the long left flank, as it was called. So that's a new tour that we bring together, and it'll probably become one that we'll offer every couple of years.
Okay.
And the other tour, there's a signature tour of Liberation Tours called the Northwest Europe Battlefield Tour. And it does a similar thing. It starts in Normandy, goes to Dieppe. And then we also then do World War I sites and cover World War I and end in southern Holland. So it's not as extensive as the Cinderella Army one on the history of World War II Canadian operations. But yeah. So those both bring us to Dieppe each time.
Okay.
And we visit, as I said, Puys, Préville, the beach of Dieppe. We're going to spend a couple days on the Dieppe operation with the Cinderella Army Tour because we have the time. So it'll be a little bit more extensive in its investigation of the thing. Okay. So yeah, it's good. And, Dieppe is the beaches at Juneau are wonderful to visit as well. Very well preserved at this time. You can get a real sense of the operation of the D-Day operation. It's the same with Dieppe. Préville, Puys, the Dieppe beaches, they're all in quite remarkable condition. Anyone who visits those beaches will come away very powerfully moved by what the Canadians face in going forward.